Hi everyone, Joe here from ActionX. Welcome to What's in the Tube. It's our show where we review things in the world of television, where today we're giving our quick impressions on a show I recently watched. It's not a review, so to speak, it's more like getting my thoughts out on a show I just watched, just expressing it. There might be some spoilers, there might not be some spoilers, I don't know. I really don't know. I had just finally finished, and obviously you probably can tell because you clicked on the title, Hunter x Hunter, which is my newest anime, not a new anime, but like another anime that I heard a lot of good things about. Then eventually one of my good friends recommended it to me, and I did. And honestly, I'm quite surprised for such an incomplete. Right now, brief history lesson time. Anime is derived from manga, and usually, preferably, once there's a lot of the manga that is created in book form, then they would tend to adapt it for animation, or in Japan, anime. And then, yeah, there's your story. In this case, the show had a previous iteration of the anime. This is the 2011 edition, not the original 90s one, because they made one back in the 90s, but that was based on just 1 year of existing material, and then they kind of, stopped at a moment. They did some filler, and then they ended up going back to some of the newer stuff that the author finished, but then they stopped again. And now we were at the point where, like, okay, there's even more material. I think it was a decent amount completed that they could actually go in there and like really get a lot of work done. And then comes to the creation of this anime, which is I think is the most definitive one right now of the two to watch. I mean, I think the old one has a bit of like a nice flair to like how anime was back in the 90s, the definite days of like everything was hand drawn on a piece of paper that was later scanned on. Remember those days? Those days are like, so they're ancient, but like they hold a certain charm to it. But the computer animation stuff, obviously, you go into more detail, you get more dynamic in there, and you have the advantage of the technology and everything, which I think definitely for this show it took a really good advantage of. And for me, I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite animes of all time. I don't believe it. I don't believe it's the case. I will say that it's a really enjoyable anime, and the team behind it did a lot of care into it, and they were limited on what they could work on, because this is not a complete story. The story of Hunter x Hunter is nothing like, I guess, nowadays with like a My Hero or Demon Slayer, where like, there's not really a giant coherent storyline, but like there's definitely an end goal. There's like, here is the big bad, here is the big threat. This is more like a world building anime where every arc you watch, they constantly continue out the lore. They build up the mythology of this world that is Earth, but it's not our Earth, so they get to take the liberty of like doing some very creative things that is based in our reality. Some things that are like our way out there as one of these types of shonen stories would tend to do, and they're able to roll with it. And also at the same time, they're able to just focus more on the characters, whether that is the characters that we're following, the titular characters or the main characters, and then get to like bring in new characters to kind of slowly expand on the world. It's definitely something new that I haven't seen before, because normally it's like you stick with your same group of character, and you maybe added 1 or 2 or 3 more new characters like on the good side. Then you get the new villains, and that's usually how I usually get my animes. Damn, this was like you're constantly getting new and new characters, and like, but you're still building out the same world. And there is no big antagonistic force here. Like, it's just world building. It's about like the characters that we're watching in this case, Golden Freaks, as he ventures out into the larger world to become a hunter like his father, and the many adventures, the many allies, and the many battles that come ahead of him. And definitely, I didn't know what I was expecting. I really didn't know. I always saw the titular cast, which consists of Gon, Kurapika, Lenorio, and Killua. I think I got the pronunciations right. As we follow these 4 who are like, Gon is the primary character, and Killua is like the secondary protagonist. Like, he's very close to being main protagonist material, but he's not. Like, he's not the front and center. And then Lenorio and Kurapika are more like, they're part of the supporting main cast, but they still got their own storylines going on. And then like the whole rest of the world revolves around it. But they're not trying to fight a big bad or anything. There's no like, you know, big villain like an all for one or some case like that where like they got to fight at the end of the show, at the end of the story. That's not the case here. It really isn't. The primary story really is just about Gon venturing out to this world to find his father, to be a hunter like his father and eventually find him. Because his father was a hunter, a relic hunter specifically, because there's different types of hunters once you get your official license. And for his father, he had to leave him behind as a kid, which I'm not really a big fan of. Like, I understand, like, you got your dreams, you got your aspirations, but, like, when you got a kid, I mean, kind of got to be a father for it. We never really got more information about his mother. It's never really clear. It's like, usually with anime protagonists, like, well, you got one parent. That's it. You got one parent. Your other parent is not canon. Like, you know, we may reference them as a reference, but like we don't really talk about them. We really don't. It's like, who's Ash's dad? Who really cares? Who's Deku's dad? Who cares? It's very rare nowadays you get an anime protagonist that has both of their parents intact somehow. It's really rare. And that's kind of like, I feel like that's the story. Like, you know, Gon eventually trying to reunite with his father and trying to, like, you know, what does he do? Because like the last he remembered of him, he was like a much younger kid. He never really had a genuine relationship with his dad because his dad always wanted to pursue his dream more than raising a child, which sounds bad in paper, but other people would say, nah, he's doing his dream. He's following for him. I'm like, he's got a kid. He's got to have that responsibility. I mean, he's got family to take care of him, but it's not really the same, so to speak. But they covered so much ground in the 148 episodes they managed to produce for this show. I know in the manga there's like 2 more things that they haven't done yet because they're not completed yet, or like this is a story, like I said, it's an open-ended story where, you know, by the time you reach the end of this show, then you do not feel like, oh my god, I can't wait to see what's like. No, obviously, you know, in the book form, you know, there's more stories to tell, but it's not finished. But in this case, it's more like, okay, we're done here. Like, you know, you kind of got that, like, you know, very much like a somber resolution where, like, it's not a complete ending. It definitely isn't something that, like, okay, we're going to touch upon later. Like, we're going to hope we come back down the line. No, it's like, you know, very much like you can speculate. You can hope for more. But it isn't something that, like, okay, we're going to, like, you know, be held on this giant cliffhanger to whenever the author gets more chapters out, whenever the next anime adaptation comes out. Like, it's not any of those. It definitely is one of the cases where this definitely feels satisfying that, like, if God forbid I never read the manga, or God forbid the story is never complete for any reason, you know, if it's not the definitive ending that people are hoping for, that this anime definitely was serviceable in a story format where, like, you got exactly what you were asking when you set it out on the first episode. And definitely it's one of those worlds like Dragon Ball or Harry Potter where, like, yeah, there's probably more stories to tell, but the primary story has concluded. And it also kind of makes me wonder, like, well, why is the manga still kind of going, you know, if Gon's not the character? I really don't know. I'm getting into, like, too deep into spoilers at the end here. But just generally, like, I was actually surprised how hooked in I was in. Because when I first started this show, it was one of those ideas in my brain that I'm probably not going to finish this pretty quickly. I think this is going to be one of those, I'll do a binge of like 4 or 5 episodes, take a break and come back. And I thought this was going to take me a longer time. This took me about 4 months to watch, 4 or 5 months to watch. And I started at the beginning of the year in January, and I'm finishing it now in June. So it took 5 months to finish. Definitely there is a big lull. There is a big lull. But what for me personally, you know, since it's one of those sort of like you're not really gripped by like a villainous force to fight, you get, in this case, it's a world building story, and you're meeting all these lore. Like, I'm gonna be honest with y'all, like, you know, definitely some of the lore stuff they introduced in the second half of the show kind of waned my interest a little bit. Like, definitely there was like very cool things that they introduced, like, you know, the Hunter's exam arc, which took a while, but like it definitely was just a fun, like, what type of situation can we put our characters next? And then you have like this Pokemon battle tower design ideology where, like, you're battling for like months on end in this like hotel extraordinaire that also has a fighting arena in the core of it. Crazy to see. And then then they eventually do fight this like a sinister force, which they could have honestly pitched this to be the actual antagonist of the series, but no, they don't get into that specifically. They're still lurking, but it's not like a big, like, they're like the final battle or anything. They're just like a villainous force they fight, and then they kind of scurried that along. And then you had like this weird VR arc, and then eventually you had the giant behemoth that was Chimera Ants, which I'm gonna be honest, that was creepy as fuck. And then you got to like a somber conclusion, which I'm like, yeah, after you spend like 60 episodes on like one gigantic thread, that's kind of where it waned a little bit for me. That kind of was waned because like I feel like this came at the time where like for me like it was kind of like in the bridge of like we don't need long arcs to tell our story. We don't need these like dozens of chapters that get adapted to hundreds of anime episodes. Those days were kind of winding down, but definitely when we got to the Chimera arc, which is like the most biggest arc in the manga and the biggest arc in the show of 60 episodes. That was the moment where like my interest was waning because like I'll be up front. I have watched Dragon Ball, so I have seen dozens and dozens of episodes them just finding Frieza or Boo or Cell or even a bit of the evil Saiyans. Like I've seen that before, obviously. Like, but I was a kid. I got the patience for that. Like but like the constant thing of like with that arc specifically was like where I was like, okay, so what's the format here? What are they trying to do? And I'm just like confused, and I'm like, is this the way? Like, definitely, I appreciate when like they don't try to be a cookie cutter of like we're just taking the mold and like just kind of like going for the motion. Like here's the new villain, and then here's like the horrendous thing the new villain does, and then eventually how does the heroes get involved? How do they get their ass kicked? Like it's not entirely as generic as that. They definitely take liberties to expand. Like that was a pretty big like mythos the developing season where like you got new characters, you got like explaining more of the existing mythology, adding in this new type of enemies. Like definitely it was that what it was, but sadly the case might be it just didn't get sustained enough for me to hold my attention over. Like that was the point of the season where like I took a while. I think I started that arc in February and I didn't really conclude it till May. And then I got busy with other stuff. I got other shows to review, like my main stuff, and then like some of the other stuff. Like my attention spans wane. I don't put these quick impressions out on a schedule. It's just when I'm done with a show, I'm done and I'll talk about it. But definitely this was one of those cases where I was thinking I can get it done by March, but then that arc came out and I'm like, oof, it's not attaching me as the way I was expecting it to be, so to speak. But the villains were actually well designed for every arc. Like definitely there's a villain, there's like a creepy, not really creepy, but like he was a very interesting design villainous force in the first couple of arcs. I forgot his name, but he had reddish hair, very white or purple costume. I forgot his name. I apologize. And he was like a very much like this is like kind of the antithesis of like a character that is not a villain per se. They're not a hero. They're just looking out for their best interest, which I'm like that's kind of how reality is right now. Like he's not trying to be a good guy, but he's definitely not trying to be a bad guy. And he's just trying to like, how do I benefit myself? How do I do things that benefit just myself? And that's it. And that's just kind of how it gets rolling over there. Then you have the Phantom Troop, which are like all very creepily designed characters, very OP, very buff. The Chimera Ants were definitely like the most creepiest one of all, especially their formation. And I'll get a little bit of detail about that is with the Chimera Ants, like the way they were building up their lore where like, it was just all ironically when the story arc began that, oh, these are Chimera Ants. They're like very specific corralled beings, corralled species that should never, ever, ever be in contact with humans. Because the moment they have this evolution where like, once they eat something that's different from their usual production cycle, they will develop characteristics to reflect on their new substance. And one of the dangerous things that they can fear is that if a Chimera Ant gets their hands on humans, the possibilities are endless for that. That there definitely will not be a case of like, okay, we're gonna be fine. No, we're fucked. We're completely fucked. And just the creepy things of like, and honestly, like I understand like, the primary base of like kind of like, the fear of humans of like, we came from the primates, and then like eventually through evolution and adaptation that we evolved to what we are today. That when we get to that point, that's how it came from. But like with the Chimera Ants, like they looked like ants, like giant, like creepy ants. And then once they take the form of humans, once they digest humans, they start to go all around. Like this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But the explanation for them is just very creepy. The fact that once they consume a human, they get technically reborn. Like, the new eggs kind of have the personality, the soul of those children, and they are very much like, still in them, but it's also like the new personalities kind of also seeped in. And that was just very creepy. That was just like, that was a very creepy arc, and it took me out of it. Like, it was very much intriguing, but at the same time, like, they just kept introducing new creepy things that, like, I just could not vibe well with this arc, so to speak. And definitely I was just confused by the end of it, that by the time we got to, like, the final arc of the season, of the show, and definitely that was, like, the thing that, like, really, like, okay, we're kind of, like, scaling it down a little bit, kind of, like, returning to, like, this idea of, like, we're kind of taking things back to the beginning, kind of taking things back to a much more simpler time, and that's kind of where we get to it. So like by the point of the end, where like that for me felt like it was an open-ended conclusion. Like, it was definitely like we could see more of this, but definitely it was like, this is the journey. This was the journey we got on when we first started the show, and how we're ending the show. It's satisfying. It really is. But mostly, like, when I mentioned the Chimera arc, and that was the thing that took me out of it, I was just curious to see, like, was Gunn ever going to find his father? Were we ever going to meet the elusive Jing? Were we ever going to do that? And that was just like the journey between 1 to 148. That by the time that Gon met Lenorio, then Kurapika, and then eventually Killua, like, these characters, like, are a very loose family. Like, they don't need to be together always. They definitely are not trying to, like, stay together every moment of the day, but definitely they do consider each other, like, we are trustworthy of each other. Like, we give a shit. Like, we give a shit about each other. Gun is like your traditional childish, shonen protagonist, where, like, he has a lot of childish traits, and yeah, that's because he's a child. But definitely he's pure-hearted. Like, he's doing this for genuine reasons, where a lot of hunters are doing these licenses just to get money. That even like the moment you even earn your license, you could just sell it on the black market and you're rich for life. Like, that's literally how it goes. Like, people will do the exam just to do that. But everyone's got their own reasons, especially like this group, like the small group. They definitely have their reasons to doing this, and they're all genuine and true to their character. Gon definitely evolves at every point in the season as he gets older, more wiser, goes through many more battles, learns new abilities about himself, and eventually, has to progress to the point where, like, he is, like, again, it's always like, oh, these kids, like, this generation of kids, they're somehow badasses. Even Killua, which I'm like, riding a skateboard, having eventually these electrical powers, just like having this, like, very tolerable strength for endurance. And I'm just like, damn, these kids are like, something else. And I'm surprised at how, like, the show kind of deviates from, like, appearances don't matter, where I was thought Lenorio was going to be the one that sticks around. He was going to be like the Brock of the group, like from Pokemon. Like, he's just a supportive character, but he's got his own stuff going on, and he also, like, has his own dream he wants to wish. Like, he's a helpful guy, he's a dependable guy, but, like, when it comes to it, like, he's going to want to, like, do things for himself and do things that are going to benefit himself, but still be helpful at the rest of the day. Kurapika was the same thing, where, like, I thought he was just going to stick around for the whole thing and just be, like, the supporting guy, and then, like, no, he has, like, a very dark storyline, and, like, I will admit, he's, like, one of the remaining things that we don't get resolved at the end of the show, where, like, that's something they save later on after the arcs, because, like, they don't always keep these four together. Like, sometimes only two of them will be there, sometimes three, sometimes all four of them. Like, it's never going to be, like, after a certain point, like, oh, these four are going to be together again. It's not. They definitely, like, deviate and go do other things in the world before they come back to each other. Which, honestly, it's, like, again, like, how life is. Like, sometimes you're going to be with people for a good amount of time. Then after that, like, okay, I got to do my own thing. I'll see y'all later. And we'll come back. We'll reunite at some point. And definitely that was just the thing that I got into it. And honestly, just the lore itself was, like, interesting. Like, when they were keeping things basic, like just the Hunter Association and just, like, how does it all work? And, like, how does, like, that sort of stuff I was really into. And then it just, like, I don't think they ever really, like, really fleshed out, personally, for my opinion, any of the villainous stuff, because, like, they just kind of felt like, they had, like, their moments in the episode, but, like, after you really think about it, it's like, okay, I really don't, like, see a need to, like, really, like, think about this anymore, because, like, it's not something that I'm interested in. Like, when they did Dragon Ball for Frieza, obviously there was, like, so much lore with, like, the Frieza force and, like, the many division. Like, this was like a militaristic, force that's trying to take over the universe, that, like, you want to see. I'm always curious, like, well, what is going on with the other things? Like, okay, Frieza's dead, but, like, what else is out there? Like, it couldn't just be Frieza. There had to be a much more elaborate like leadership behind it there was. And like that's the sort of thing like you want to keep thinking, like, you know, eventually you want to keep demanding, like, I want to see more of this because this is intriguing to me. That's why they brought back Frieza, and they've eventually in Dragon Ball as well, they brought back the Red Ribbon Army. And that was it. But like for me, like I never really clamored for like the Phantom Trope to come back. I never really clamored for another division of the Chimera Ants to take over. Like it was never really something like I was really interested in for the longest time, and I'm still not. Like I'm like after the show's done, like I'm not clamoring to see them again. Like it's not like something like, oh, let's get a movie called Return of the Chimera. Like that's nothing like that. I'm not really interested in that. Just, you know, it just like it wasn't as well developed for me. Like they're cool, they're very well designed. They're very much like very cool villains to look at, but they didn't really for me have enough substance to really get into it. And you know, and as much as people say like, oh, your story's only as great with your heroes and your villains, like those are one of those cases where like, yeah, the heroes just like always like I was always curious to see what the next thing is going to be for them. What's going to be the next thing to see out of them. And even now, like, you know, having completed the show and like being aware that there's more story in the manga that has yet to be adapted, and will it ever be adapted? I don't think so, but that's just my personal preference. At least not in the 2020s. I don't see that happening. I really don't. If we somehow do, I'll be wrong, but like I just don't. I don't see that. I really don't. But definitely, what I would say is that they could have really like figured out a way to like, you know, maybe delay the ending of how things were and then fit in other stuff. And I'm like, I don't know, like, is this something like this feels like a show, this feels like a story that isn't going to really have a definitive like ending per se. It doesn't feel like, it just feels like the world will continue onwards, and for the anime team, they managed to find their point and they're like, we're done. We told our story, we finish, we're ready to move on. And that was something that I was actually genuinely surprised at, and I would hope that eventually the manga does find its conclusion so that we can have a little closure, because it's the same thing like a One Piece or a what else is ongoing, and a Naruto / Boruto. Like, will it ever end? Will there be a point where like, yeah, it's finally said and done? Who the frick knows? Like, I don't really know. Like, they keep saying like, oh, One Piece is gonna end by this year, or it's gonna end by this year. Like, bro, I'll believe when it ends, when it like says this is the final chapter and you're done. Will that ever happen? Probably not. But we'll see how things go. We'll see how they go. But for right now, Hunter x Hunter, it's one of those rare animes where it's an ongoing manga that has a very solidified ending to its anime counterpart, where you can literally just watch the anime. You can elect to go to the manga and just wait for the rest of your life for the ending of it. But this tells like a pretty good story that's not on the whole good versus evil side of things. It's more about like peeking into a world that isn't our own and allowing us to like creatively explore what this like brave new world has to offer each other, and just follow a simple story of like one boy just trying to be, you know, see himself fitting and worthy to be in his father's shoes. And that's all that is about it. So for me personally, I would recommend this a lot. Like if you got the time for like this is not a long anime, it really is. Like 140 episodes may seem like a lot, but like really it's not. There's much longer cases out there. So definitely, if you are interested, definitely go check it out. I really recommend it. You can find it right now on Netflix and Hulu. If you want to. I do believe there is probably some sort of complete season box set somewhere out there. But I'm not relatively privy to that information. Plus, they're going to probably pick it up again. I don't know. It's one of those, like, it's not really over the story, so I'm like, does it really make sense to buy it? I really don't know. My brain is, like, not operational to think about that at this point. But, yeah, I would give it a really great recommendation of, like, go watch it. It's not a binge show, but, like, definitely watch it. If you're willing to, like, just have a fun, like, you know, kind of closed-ended story, if you want to. That's just in my opinion about it. But yeah, let me know comments below. What did you think of Hunter x Hunter? If you have watched it, I would love to hear your comments down below, because I love to have conversations with you all about it. But I believe that's going to do for me today, everyone. So otherwise, it's been What's the Tube from ActionX. Give me my quick impressions on Hunter x Hunter. If you want to see more of us on What's the Tube about what we're normally producing, currently right now we're doing episode by episode reviews of Nancy Drew Season 4, and also of The Crowded Room starring Tom Holland. So you can go check them out on youtube.com/ActionX videos. But thank you so much for watching. Either way, for this one, please subscribe if you haven't yet. Ring the bell for notification when our next video is live. Like, favorite, share if you want to, and follow us on social media. But until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. But until that point comes, stay safe out there, be good to each other, and as always, peace out.